The Houston Cougars are off to join the Big 12 this fall in the expanding conference landscape. TCU has tested those waters before. Just going to talk to Stephen Simcox today about how that went. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs and also Locked On Horned Frogs. I almost just said frogs. Locked On Horned Frogs. We are your hosts. I'm Park Ranger. That's Steven. Steven, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. I'm happy to be on. I'm kind of sad for you because so our buddy Jake Hatch has the Locked On Cougars name, and that's sort of like I've made this joke with him before, but Locked On Cougars sounds like a night out with Dana Holgorsen. Like it would be perfect for the Houston show. But I like Locked On Cougs because it's sort of its own unique branding. So I'm excited to talk with you for the first time.
Yeah, I will say a night out with Dana Holgorsen make for a whole different, very differently rated podcast. Yeah, for sure. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about Houston, TCU, the Big 12. The Big 12 landscape does appear to be ever changing. One of those big changes in the expansion of the conference and a 14-team Big 12 next year, say that 10 times fast, is Houston is one of the teams coming in. TCU has quite literally done that before. I keep wanting to say a decade ago, but it's actually closer to a dozen years ago now. And that just, I guess, shows my own age. Stephen, what do you remember about TCU joining the Big 12 conference? Because they'd had some pretty substantial success before that. When TCU joined the conference, what do you remember about that time period, that transition?
Well, it was really exciting time. I mean, I'm stoked for your audience to sort of go through this. I know Houston, similarly to TCU, there's a lot of those Texas ties, those regional ties, those rivalries that kind of get rekindled in a new way with the conference schedule. And yeah, that was the biggest thing I remember was the stadium had just been renovated. They were going into the Big 12. It was obviously a really long journey for TCU to get back to Power 5 relevancy. I mean, on the field, not to be like a cautionary tale, but it was tougher than I feel like most people would have expected. I remember getting some of the lectures from folks about, okay, it's really hard to get the depth to a level where, you know, you're ready to compete. And I was like, whatever, like TCU's gonna be fine. They dominated the Mountain West. They're a really good program. They've beaten Power 5 schools, but it was a tough transition. Now, some of that was Casey Paul Hall, their quarterback at the time. I mean, he seemed like a pretty established starter. He went through some personal issues with drug use and ended up being off the team. And then that really set the team back for a couple of seasons, honestly, trying to replace him. But yeah, it was, you know, they were competitive. They were tough. They played in a lot of close games. In 2012, I believe their final record was 7-6. They did make a bowl game. Then in 2013 went 4-8. But then after that, 2 seasons where in 2014 they won a share of the Big 12 title. You were kind of knocking on the door in the playoff. In 2015 had a really good season as well. And, you know, now have kind of established themselves as one of the main members of the Big 12 conference. So it's possible to make this jump and do it at a really high level. I think Houston has some built-in advantages with that recruiting base, with the transfer portal now, that they can definitely try to hone in on and exploit. But yeah, it was a tough transition, but it's exciting. And I mean, as I didn't really get to experience the Mountain West era. I know TCU had rivalries with like Utah and BYU, and those kind of schools, but it's just so much more fun when it's teams that are around your area, you know. And like I work in an office with people from Oklahoma State and people that went to Texas and people that went to Baylor. And it just makes the Saturdays so much more fun. So it's a good time to be a Houston Cougar fan, I would imagine. And I know you guys are excited about making this transition.
We're very excited. One cautionary tale. I mean, you mentioned that the first year was kind of rough. I think people are worried about, and Houston's a bigger university as far as the undergraduate attendance, I guess, but the fan base size between TCU and Houston are probably comparable. It's a relatively small fan base. TCU is in the DFW Metroplex, and Houston obviously is in Houston. And so those are big areas, like you mentioned, with lots of people from lots of different Big 12 schools. What have you noticed as a kind of like small fish in a big pond? I mean, you've had no problem eating in the pond. So like what have you noticed being that?
I mean, the fan attendance is always a hot topic. I think TCU, like any other school in the country, if the program's not successful, then it's tough to get people to show up to games all the time. And so that's noticeable. It's noticeable on TV. It's obviously good fodder for rival fans on Twitter to take pictures of empty seats and put it out and be like, it's 20 minutes before a top 15 game, and not everybody's, in the stands. TCU, I think it's fair to say that people might not love me saying this, but the fan base likes to tailgate. Some people don't always get in there in the first quarter. Some people might not even make it in the gate. It's just it's a fan base that enjoys that part of the experience as well. And with it being a smaller school, smaller fan base, I just feel like there's no, like, if there's apathy, there's no way to make it up. So like if Texas, which is a national brand to a certain extent, if they're struggling and not everybody's there, well, maybe there's some other fans that will fill in those seats that people left over. At TCU, that's not necessarily the case, if that makes sense. And then the other thing that they honestly started trying to take care of this year that caused a lot of controversy is being in the Metroplex. As you said, Parker, there's a ton of people from a ton of different places. It really is like a melting pot. And I know Houston is exactly like that. You walk around and you can find alums from everywhere. And so one thing that TCU did last year, there were select games where they did not sell single game tickets. They did not sell single game tickets to Texas Tech fans, and Texas Tech fans will tell you about that. I believe they're not selling single game tickets to BYU games this year because there's a large contingent of BYU fans in the DFW area. And so it looks like it does look kind of weak on the surface, but at the same time, I understand why they're doing it, because they're trying to protect themselves from, an opposing fan base just trying to overtake a stadium. Or even if it's like 55-45 TCU, that's not exactly the home field advantage that you want to sign up for. So that's a weird aspect of being a smaller school in a bigger conference. And then I think there's just the national media coverage isn't always there, but everybody I think every college fan base kind of has a victim complex about that. So that's not unique to TCU. But yeah, it's difficult. And I don't know how Houston will approach all those things, especially like the fan attendance. That'll be curious to see. It might take a few years for them to get a sample size of, okay, which schools are trying to overrun our basketball stadium or football stadium when they play the Cougs. But yeah, that's one thing that TCU did implement last season that caused a lot of hoopla, was not allowing some single game tickets. Like you had to buy either a small package or season tickets, because they knew like it's just hard to compete with some of the bigger state schools when games are in the area.
All right, so this fall, September 16th, they've at least given us a 7:00 kickoff to, so we don't all melt in the sun. But TCU, Houston open Big 12 play against one another, frankly, early in the third week of the season, right? I mean, most schools are opening up the fourth week with their conference play. TCU had obviously tremendous 2022, and you can go check out, if you're a Coogs fan, you want to go dial into that. Locked On Horned Frogs covered the whole thing very well and thoroughly the whole time. What do they look like in 2023? Who's coming back? Who's on first? What are the TCU going to look like this fall?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely losing a lot of production. So Max Duggan is gone. Chandler Morris is stepping into that quarterback role. And Chandler's, it's strange. Like, he's been on campus for so long. I feel like people talk really definitively about him, like we know who he is, but he's only played in 2 or 3 games. So I have confidence that he can do the job, and he did win the job last year. Like, he was named the starting quarterback out of fall camp. He gets injured. Max comes in. History is what it is. He runs away with it from then on. But I feel like Chandler is definitely capable, but you have some mixing and matching with the skill positions too. New running back, new wide receivers. They did hit the transfer portal hard. They went and got Trey Sanders, Alabama running back, who's kind of an interesting player because he's dealt with a pretty extensive injury history when he was at Bama, but he seems like he's in pretty good health at the moment. And then guys like JoJo Earl, John Paul from Alabama, slot receiver, John Paul Richardson, slot receiver from Oklahoma State. So I think they've tried to reload to a certain extent. Replacing Quentin Johnston is going to be really tough. They got some guys like Savion Williams on the outside who had experience last year, but he was not your number one outside wide receiver, and so he'll have to step in to that role. They got a true freshman wide receiver in Cordell Russell that they're pretty excited about. On the defensive side, it's year 2 under defensive coordinator Joe Gillespie, and they actually are returning a lot on that side of the ball. Pretty much all their safeties are coming back. They lost their corners. Travis Hodges-Tomlinson was their Thorpe Award winner last season, but again, hit the portal hard. Went and got Avery Helm, the corner from Florida, who will step in and started a lot of games in the SEC. And I would say my biggest concern for the defense is probably the D-line. They lost Dylan Horton, who will be in your neck of the woods now with the Texans. He got picked up by them, and he was their big sack guy last year. So they're going to have to find a way to replace that production. And then I think on the other side of the trenches, one funny thing that happened, I didn't realize it until the national championship game last year, Parker, but their offensive line, all 5 guys started every game. So they had 75 starts between those 5 guys, which is pretty unheard of for a position with that level of physicality to not have any sort of injury issues. And so they're replacing 3 of those O-linemen. So that's all, coming together. But I think maybe it's just the optimism of what happened last year. I feel like Sonny Dykes can figure this out. But they also cut a lot of breaks last season. They won some close games. And so it'll be kind of fascinating to see what their follow-up act is like. But they definitely lost a lot of returning players from last year. And, on paper, I think they feel good about the guys that are replacing them, but they have to actually do it on the field, and we have to actually see it before, we can totally say, oh, yeah, Chandler Morris is a good Max Duggan substitute, or Amani Bailey and Trey Sanders are great substitutes for Kendra Miller. But overall, they've kind of plugged some roster holes with the portal, and I think they feel good about some of the guys that have been with the program that are going to have a larger role.
Coogs House. All right, now, before we get going too much farther, talking about all of the fun stuff going on with the Houston Cougars this fall, this football season, going into the Big 12 and all of that, we do need to take a second and talk about the most fun product out there right now, and that are Bird Dogs shorts and pants. They're great for all occasions. They make you look and feel great. I wear them on dates with my wife. I wear them in front of my classroom. I wear them sit here podcasting. I wear them to the pool. I've worn the shorts to the pool already. The shorts have been with me to the gym already as well. Bird Dogs are made for any and all occasions. They got stretch fabrics that make you they're tight fittings to make you look a little slimmer, but also feel stretchy and roomy at the same time. The liner inside is a must. You don't have to have it, but the liner inside is a must. Trust me and thank me later. You'll find yourself wearing Bird Dogs on all occasions. So make sure you grab a pair today. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. Use the promo code lockedoncollege. Tell them that we sent you, and they'll throw in a free Yeti-style tumbler with Bird Dog logo on the front. Keeps the cold drinks cold and the hot drinks hot. Trust me, this summer in Texas, you're going to try to keep those cold drinks cold as long as possible. You're going to want that tumbler. You're going to want these shorts. You're going to want these pants. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege today.
Roll this season.
So, and I want to give you time to speak to your audience too, but what questions is TCU at all concerned about Houston opening up the year? I mean, a year ago, Houston was 12-2, but last year we were just 8-5. Obviously, losing a starting quarterback like that changed things. Like, what does TCU think about a school like Houston coming in?
I mean, when I think of Houston, I think of a lot of speed and a lot of athletes. And so, yes, I would say there's some concern there. And playing them in a night game in the opening, Big 12, big extravaganza, that will be tough. I feel like most TCU fans, when they look at the schedule, that's probably not the first one that they circle. The back half of the schedule is really tough with like Texas and Kansas State and Baylor and some of those rivalry games. But yeah, playing Houston's going to be fun. I feel like from a staff perspective, they're excited. They're already doing this, but to kind of have more of a foothold in that geographical area, right, in that Houston pipeline, Louisiana pipeline. But Dana Holgorsen's a good coach. I mean, he's done this before. He's succeeded at the Big 12 level, and Houston is always known to be a school that can bring in guys that can play. I think one of the many reasons, and you know this better than me, but one of the many reasons this took so long was because coaches and athletic directors didn't want to give Houston that recruiting advantage of having the ability to tell kids in the backyard, like, yeah, you can play in a Power 5 conference and play against some of the best schools in the country, and you don't have to leave, you don't have to leave home. Like mom and grandma and everybody can come watch you play. And so that's going to be a big advantage for them. But I think there's concern about Houston, man. I think this season it's not one of the first games TCU fans might think of as far as one that could trip them up, but there's definitely unique circumstances to it. And I might be overlooking how big of a deal that's going to be, just that Big 12 opening game at night on national television, big stage for them to make a statement against a TCU team that's in transition.
What are the questions do TCU folks have about the U of H? Or again, like, is it the year one thing not really a concern at all?
Man, I mean, my biggest question when I look at with Houston is, and I don't know what his I don't know what his career arc was and how fans felt about him. But what's this quarterback battle looking like? How do you kind of replace someone like Clayton Tune, who was, I mean, a multi-year starter there, and someone who you could at least consistently account for, hey, he's going to be solid, he's going to do what he can, and not beat you with mistakes.
And Clayton's going to be missed. I liked Clayton a lot as a kid. He was very I think some people thought he was almost boring. He was so didn't want to say anything too controversial ever. And he's a DFW kid, right? Fort Worth DFW kid. The truth is that, we didn't have a spring game because of weather and practice days and those whatever things. So we're still kind of in flux as to who it's going to be. Dana and staff have been very much, it's still 50-50. The kids are a kid named Lucas Coley, who came in the spring of 22, came over from Arkansas. He's transferred, but never got on the field at Arkansas. He's a 6'1". He played in San Antonio in high school. And then the other kid is Donovan Smith from Texas Tech, who you might remember as TCU guys, right? He kind of had some moments throughout his season last year where he's erratic with throwing the ball away, but he can run the football, and he runs over some people too. He's a 6'5". He's a big, strong guy. And those are the two kids that are kind of running away with, it's back and forth between them. As far as who gets to replace Clayton, I'd imagine even if it were Coley, there'd still be some sort of a goal line package for Donovan because he's just that kind of a runner. But honestly, like at practice and anything media guys see, they very much split reps. We didn't have a spring game, so we didn't see them in any sort of competitive thing. The advantages I see is that Coley's been in the system with Dana for a year, and Donovan Smith's advantage is that he played in the Big 12 for so he understands what the competition's like. So your guess is as good as mine, but I'd imagine you see Donovan Smith in the field at some point, even if he's not the starter.
Yeah, Donovan was always the dude that fascinated me. I remember when they beat Texas last year, like he played well. He did use his legs a lot. But I was never I've never been super sold on Tyler Shook. So I was sort of surprised when he ended up moving on. But that was a good pickup by Dana. The other thing about kind of moving around, Parker, is I remember Gary Patterson talking about this when TCU made that move to the Big 12. Like the physicality on a week-in, week-out basis was the thing that he said he just had the biggest concern about. How do you feel like Houston's set up, in the trenches? Are they ready for this jump with the O-line and the D-line, having that depth to kind of make that transition each and every week where you're playing big physical teams?
I'm feeling better about the defense line, the offensive line. Houston's got some pass rushers and a couple 290, 300-pound interior tackle guys. Depth may be an issue down the line, but I think at least in the first 8 guys, the first 2 on the rotation chart, I think you're feeling okay about on the defensive side. Offensively, had a fairly successful American Athletic Conference offensive line last year, and that's obviously a little bit different than the Big 12 is going to be. Left tackle Patrick Paul may be a pro, so I don't mean to sell him short. But the question, and then Jack Freeman is a returning, started every game since his whatever year. He's been around a long time. He's at center. The truth is that while those are two really important spots, the other three are kind of question marks. Houston lost a kid to Missouri in the transfer portal off the offensive line, and has brought in some guys that are kind of FIU products, or a guy that was coming from Texas but never got on the field at Texas kind of guys. And so they've got new faces along the line for sure. It's kind of the question mark. I think the biggest thing, and you saw, as you mentioned last year at TCU, the biggest thing is keeping those five guys healthy, right? Like, can you get a good five, or even if you got a good seven, and kind of keep them healthy and upright all year long? Because no one's got 10, right? So you've got to make sure the guys you got stay healthy. But Patrick Paul will be the offensive line name to remember. Jack Freeman being the center. He's a longtime starter. And I think they're both very good. It's the other three spots I got some questions about.
So one thing I did a few weeks ago, Parker, that was really good for my views is I talked about Colorado and Deion Sanders. Have you done this yet? Have you poked the Colorado Hornets nest?
Yeah, because we're coming into the Big 12, and I'm like, if they come in, they're kind of steal our thunder a little bit. Now, I will say, when we mentioned about guys Houston's lost in transfer portal, I think everyone lost someone to Colorado. They stole our running back, and so
that's what I was going to ask you. Like, was that expected, and how are they accounting for that now that he's moving on?
So expected in the sense that anyone thought he was going to transfer. It was a very big shock to the system. I mean, like Dana. It looked like Dana might have been about to cry. And I don't mean that to say like Dana is a sorry or sad person, but just like they were really close, and it kind of took a shock to the system. But within 10 minutes of the announcement that he was going to transfer, the leaks were all Colorado. So that he got to Colorado, I think, was not a surprise. It was just that he was going to transfer at all. I frankly kind of hope that if they're going to join the Big 12, they do it in the fall of 24, let's say, as fast as possible. And then we get to play them. It'd be nice to get a little bit of a revenge game there. I also think, frankly, that if the Colorado joins the Big 12 and Deion comes in, he's probably only there a couple years anyway, and then they're back to being Colorado, and we're all good then. Right? Like that becomes a little bit easier schedule all of a sudden. So bring that on, in my opinion. What does TCU think about Colorado?
Well, they opened with them this year, which is a funny thing because they had the home and home. So they played them in Boulder last season, and won handily, even though it was a close game at halftime. But I did a video about how I thought they play Colorado at home in week 1, and I was just like, I think they're going to smoke Colorado. I just don't feel like that team's going to come together. Anyway, I've had Colorado people in my comments for a month, which is fine. I mean, if you followed me here, hello, I appreciate you guys driving up my view count. But I just knew that connection was there with McCaskill going to CU. About the portal though, and then we can get to win totals. But one thing that TCU's found a lot of success with in the portal is DFW kid who washed out at Alabama or Auburn or somewhere like that. Come on home, we'll get you, or not even washed out, but just wasn't playing. Come home, we'll get you set up here. We'll get you some playing time. You can be close to family again. Has that been beneficial for Houston? I know you've mentioned a couple guys that they've lost to the portal. Has the transfer portal been a good thing from them because of that talent that is so near in that area, and so many guys that kind of go off, and then maybe getting them to come back?
Yeah, I would say that on the whole, while losing Cameron Johnson and Alton McCaskill were obviously tough to see go, they definitely have brought in as much, if not more. Certainly on the defensive side, they brought in a linebacker. They're transitioning to an edge rusher from Oklahoma. They've brought in a defensive back from New Mexico. Who is that? A kid from across town at Texas, I guess across the street at Texas Southern. HBCU here in Houston. I think what's interesting in looking at all, and then obviously the quarterback Donovan Smith. Donovan Smith, I guess, is technically from the Panhandle as well, though his dad's a coach, so they moved around a lot. The real deal is that they're trying to bring in guys that are ready to play in the Big 12 right away, and so they're not all necessarily originally Houston area kids. I guess like Adari Halsey certainly was. He's from Fort Bend Marshall. He's the defensive back that like led New Mexico in tackles or something, some crazy statistical kind of stuff while he's at New Mexico. And I have to say honestly that like it was an interesting transition for sure to see Dana go that route. Dana's been more of a JUCO kind of guy for the however long it's been now, and then to see him go to more of a traditional transfer portal thing, because the portal kind of opened up that window, was really, really interesting and different. I don't know what necessarily like sparked that change, but it certainly like was an interesting change to see. I think in the long term, though, Houston football could absolutely see more of a kids coming back home, especially to demonstrate some success in Houston. I can't imagine that would be a bad thing for any aspect of recruiting. But if Houston is successful in the Big 12, it certainly feels like it would be a very easy transition for a high school kid to be like, oh, I went to TCU, or I went to Oklahoma, or I went to Alabama, and was kind of farther down the depth chart than I realized. I can go back to Houston and be in the Big 12 and get on the field very quickly, theoretically, and then compete for a starting spot or whatever. And so in the big picture, I could see Dana Holgorsen doing something to that extent. But in the more immediate, small, like this fall kind of window, they've been doing a lot of things. They got one of the more highly ranked recruiting classes that Dana's ever had, at the University of Houston really has ever had. They brought in 16 transfers. They've hit 4 or 5 JUCO kids up so far and are still looking to add more JUCO kids. It's a busy, busy time in the recruiting scene for Houston in kind of an untraditional way too. So it's been a very different kind of atmosphere on the recruiting front for Houston. I wrote down the time that I kind of stopped rambling, because you got to keep this thing going, obviously, or else it doesn't just like start and stop. And then I'll write down whatever time you want to dial back in at. You okay? The Wi-Fi just went out randomly. Everything all right?
I mean, it just clicked off and clicked on. So, yeah. Do you just want to finish your thought, and then we can do win totals real quick? And
yeah. So I actually finished it in. Let me put it. It was like this view. And so what I was thinking is I could go from this view. Can you hear me still? So if I go from this view back and then I'll pull you back in, it might look somewhat more, I don't know. It might look, it might look more natural. We'll see. Is that cool? All right, then I'll try that in 3, 2, let's just start at 2745, because that's going to be the most like clean cut. So anyway, and I guess as I bring you back in, Stephen, what I'm trying to say is that Houston's recruiting has been like kind of all over the place. They've done junior colleges, they've done transfers, they've done high school kids, they've done Houston kids, they've done Central Texas kids, they've done Louisiana kids, Florida kids, all of it. A lot of different stuff. One thing that's interesting to me, Stephen, is that with all of this coming and the like track record that Dana Holgorsen has in the Big 12 from his days at West Virginia, the win total on FanDuel, and I love our partners at FanDuel. It's nice to have them, but the win total is 4.5. And so I feel personally offended by that. But TCU coming off of a college football championship appearance, they've got y'all at 7.5. What were your thoughts on TCU theoretically being just under 7.5 games next year?
I mean, I'm fine with it because over 7.5 is easy money. So like, let's not say it too loud. I got 4 kids. I need more dino nuggets to feed them. Like, I'm going to bet hard on the TCU over. Yeah. I thought it was sort of disrespectful. I mean, it feels like kind of a cop out. I think there's a lot of, you just look on the surface and you're like, okay, there's a lot of transition here, a lot of turnover, 7 wins, mark it down. And they probably got a lot of action because if you sort of look around, I know there are a number of people that think, 7-5 is possible. I feel like if they end up 7-5, then there's a lot of disappointed TCU fans around the area, around the country. But the biggest thing to me is the non-conference schedule. Like, you should beat SMU. You have an FCS opponent, and then you get Colorado to open the season. I think that's 3 wins right there. Now, the schedule gets harder at the end of the year. They play Texas, Oklahoma, Baylor, K-State to close the season, and that's going to be a tough run. Not exactly in that order. I'm not looking at it right now, but I know that there's a 4. But I really feel like, Parker, and no disrespect to Houston, I think, those first 7 or 8 games, at least on paper, TCU will probably be favored in them. And so if you go 6-2, 7-1, 8-0, then you're already there. If you go 8-0, 7-1, 6-2, you're knocking on the door. I mean, I think over 7.5 is a pretty solid bet. I wonder if there's any movement, on that line at any point this offseason. But yes, your Cougars. I mean, tell me about that. So 4.5. I mean, do they just think they don't have any juice coming into a new conference, coming off an 8-5 season?
Man, I don't know. So in the first month of the season, and I admit that you're probably right that, and we'll talk about the path to victory and Locked on Cougs between now and September 16th. I think there is one for Houston, but I would imagine TCU is the betting favorite in that game. That's a fair thing. There are 3 non-conference games where UTSA, a good program, but still not a Big 12 program for sure, at Rice, which is an away game, but in town, and then at home versus Sam Houston State. Like, theoretically, those ought to be 3 wins, right? Like that you get, I guess UTSA is a growing program, but you get them at home to open the year. I just look at this team and think, you're telling me that the betting is like, are you going to win more than one conference game? Meanwhile, admittedly, we open with you guys and you're coming off college football championship appearance or what have you. Meanwhile, Houston's slate in the conference is pretty favorable, I think, for a first-year Big 12 team. We had to play Cincinnati and Central Florida. I guess Central Florida is in Orlando, but those are both teams kind of in the same realm as Houston as far as American Athletic Conference teams coming into the conference. We get Oklahoma State at home. I think of them as a fairly weak program. I guess maybe I can be proven wrong on that, but I'm like, I think that's one they could go get right now. And then last year they played Texas Tech into overtime, and that's a game I guess we got to go on the road to Lubbock, and that's not easy to play in. But like, Houston played them very, very well just last season. And that's not mentioning like West Virginia comes to Houston on a Thursday night, a short week for them. And, and it's off of Houston's bye week. So they actually kind of have a long week for Houston. Like, I think this is very favorable for Houston. And I can't believe we're sitting at 4.5. I'm like you. I'm not going to go tell the folks at FanDuel to change it. I'm just going to put my money where my mouth is and call it good.
Yeah. But I do wonder too, though, like how much, because you talked about the schedule, and I'm curious, like how much that played into the wonky win totals this year, because it's such a difference. Like, they didn't end up doing the divisions, and Oklahoma State's a fascinating program because I agree with you, Parker. I think this is one of the worst Mike Gundy teams in a long time from a talent perspective, but they don't play anybody in the state of Texas except for Houston. Like, they get all the newcomers this year. Like, their schedule looks pretty manageable. And I have no idea what happened with Oklahoma. I don't know if Brett Yormark was like scheduling basketball games in Mexico City the week they did the schedule or something. But like they gave Oklahoma just a parting gift. They were like, here, Brett Venables, you had a mediocre season. Let's just give you a little boost on the way out. We'll give you 8 or 9 wins. Like the Sooners schedule is a cakewalk too. And I'm thinking, why did you not do divisions and put Oklahoma and Texas on the same side of the bracket to ensure that we didn't get the nightmare scenario of like an SEC title game in the Big 12 championship game in their final year? But secondly, why are you like propping up OU and their final season in the conference? I don't understand it, but I think you're right about Houston. I'm going to put money on over 4.5 too. I'm glad you told me that because that can just add to my collection on FanDuel.
Well, exactly. Cause it's like, if you beat Central Florida and Cincinnati is good, but that's 2 American Athletic Conference teams that they would have played if they weren't in the same division, but in the same conference season in any given season. Then you factor in like say Oklahoma State's kind of having a down couple. I thought they were pretty down last year too. I guess they beat Texas in a weird comeback, right? Just a lot of games on the line here for Houston that I think they can win. You mentioned you think TCU is going over as well, but you also alluded to is Oklahoma's got the most favorable schedule here. What can we do to make sure that Oklahoma doesn't play Texas in the Big 12 title game? How can we? Obviously, I like to see that it'd be Oklahoma versus Houston because that'd be the only time Houston and Oklahoma get to play in conference. But what do we have to get done? What strings do we have to pull here? How can we make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I hope the Frogs do their part. They play OU in Norman, like in the last regular season game of the year. And so I'm crossing my fingers that game means something and maybe they can knock them out of the Big 12 title race. But yeah, I really don't like the petty energy that Big 12 fans have been giving now for 2 years. It didn't make it to the league office. And I'm very sad about that. Maybe those are more mature, bigger people up there with like personal growth, but I don't want any of that to happen. I just want Texas and OU out of the Big 12 title game. And I'm not sure why I'm pointing. This has suddenly turned into like first take, but I'm going to stop doing that. But I just don't want to see OU and Texas in the conference title game. That's my big mission for Brett Yormark and company.
So we'll be following, and frankly, TCU being the opening Big 12 game, we'll be following very closely. Houston and TCU all the way up. Stephen, where can people find you, the show, your work, etc.?
Yeah, so we're on YouTube, just like you are, Parker. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's a channel. Also, wherever it is you get your podcast in its audio form. And then on Twitter, our show is at Locked On TCU. I tweet the show from that account. I'm not always great about like live tweeting events and stuff from there. So it's probably better to follow my personal account, which is at Simcox Steven. And yeah, you can find me there. Where can my Horned Frog fans that are tuning in, where can they find you, Parker?
Well, especially as we're kicking off the Big 12 season together, I guess they may actually tune in, so it's worth pointing out. Locked on Coogs, the show. Coogs is Coogs. So I've especially pointed that out because, as you mentioned, we do have a Cougars, which is spelled actually like it's supposed to be spelled, but Coogs is how we spell it. So Coogs on YouTube and all your podcast things. I tweet all the stuff though from my personal account, just at Painsworth 512 PAINSWORTH 512, and it's all things Cougars, but it's also Rockets and Astros and Texans and NBA playoffs and all those kinds of things. So follow me at Painsworth 512. Stephen, it's been fun going back and forth today. I hope it stays collegial as we lead up to September 16th. It's going to be a fun matchup, and I'm excited to be in a conference where I get to play these fun matchups. So thank you for having us in the conference, I guess.
Yeah, man, looking forward to playing you guys in football, and that basketball program something else. So I wouldn't say I'm excited for Jamie Dixon's squad to play Kelvin Sampson and company, but it will be nice to have another really good basketball program as part of the Big 12 Conference.
Definitely. Take care, man. Now, I always sign up as saying go Cougs. I don't know. What did you say? Go Frog?
Yeah. Do y'all have a hand sign? Everybody in the state of Texas has a hand sign.
We do. We go Cougs like that.
Okay,
it's like
that looks like a gang sign. I don't know about that. That's a frog. Those are the frogs there.
Go Cougs.